Hi everyone, Jane here. Thank you so much for watching today and welcome to you all. Now, recently I realised that my pens in their pots on my rolling cart were not getting used. So I saw a YouTuber who does a lot of stuff to do with storage. I'll link her channel below. I think it's called Scrappy Wife or something like that. But she had something a bit like this pen storage system. So I went on to Amazon and found similar. She'd made hers, but I found very similar setup. And I ordered it because what I wanted was for my pens to be right in front of me where I could reach them very easily and hoping that I would then use them a lot more. So I've got a lot of different types of pens here. We've got paint pens, we've got pigment pens, with India ink, we've got jelly roll pens, we've got water-based pens. But do you really need all of these types of pens? Or should I say, do I really need all of these types of pens? Of course, my answer is yes, but just to prove it to you, I'm going to make a project in my Canson art book using the pens. Now, this is watercolour paper. It's Saunders Waterford, and it is the A5 size pad. It's a cold press watercolour, and I was a little bit concerned whether I should use it or not with my pens, because your pens are a little bit more delicate than using, say, a paintbrush. But I decided I was going to have a go. So I decided to start off with some water-based pens, and I have the Royal Talens Ecoline pens. And these water out, and they are a bit like a watercolour, but in a pen form. Now, as you can see, when I put the pen directly onto the paper, it didn't water out that brilliantly for me. So I find with these pens, unless you get a sort of paper that doesn't drag the colour in too quickly, that is the sort of thing that happens. So what I tend to do is I scribble my pen out onto a surface such as an acrylic block or a blending mat, and then I use my watercolour brush or my brushes with some water to blend them out that way. So I was really going over this, trying to get rid of that splodge that I'd made to start with. Now, the colours I have used, I will list them all in the description box below, but just to give you a quick idea, I used for this part Magenta, Deep Orange and Chartreuse. Those are the three colours, and I was also sort of splodging onto the block. Now, the other great thing with these water-based pens is you can use them with your stamps. And even though I know this is a technique you can do with ink pads, you can put different colours on. With your pens, because you've got that finer tip, you can get a bit more precision if you want to colour certain areas on your stamp, certain colours. So for example, if you had a flower and you wanted the petals to be pink and you wanted the leaves to be green, you can get a lot more precision. Now, I'm using my Make a Mark stamp set that I designed for Cleverprints. Unfortunately, Cleverprints I don't think are in business anymore, so there is no way to get hold of these. But I am a great believer in using what you have, and just because things aren't available, you would still use them, so I'm still going to use them. But I'm sure if you had similar sorts of stamps, backgroundy stamps, this is a technique that you could try with any stamps that you have. It doesn't even have to be background stamps. You can do it with your focal points. Now, as you can see here, I'm stamping and then I'm trying to draw a bit of the colour out, which is something you could do with things like distress inks. Now, I found it wasn't working as well in here. I do believe it's because I'm using that 300 GSM cold press watercolour paper. And what that is doing, I think, is when I'm stamping, it's taking the colour in very quickly, because where the ink from the pen had gone onto the painter's tape, I was able to lift that and use that. Now, as well as just stamping directly, you can also spritz your stamps then with some water, get a more watery look. I don't think you can overly see me spritzing it, but I have got a little spritzer bottle of water and I'm spritzing onto the stamp before I stamp it this time. The others don't know. Which one was correct there? And so I'm just going with the same colours I've already used in the background. For this one, I'm just scribbling in the middle. So you don't even have to do the whole stamp, and I'm taking my pen to the side so I get the biggest area. I don't want to damage the tip. They are pens at the end of the day. You do need to be a little bit careful. Now, so far I've used all the water-based type pens. Now I want to go into my more permanent pens. So I'm getting out this stencil. It's a Be Crafty Dinkable. It's just different sorts of circles. I don't know if it's got a name. And I want something that is going to be more permanent. So I'm going in with a Copic Acrea. Now, Copic Acreas are acrylic markers, the same as things like your Arrtx markers, your Posca markers, things like that. I have other acrylic markers. I have Copic Acreas, I have Poscas, I have Arrtx. For me, it's about the tips with them. The Copic Acreas I find beautifully fine tipped, so I do enjoy how they work. With my Poscas, I get a range of bullet tips, and with my Arrtx, which is what I'm coming in with now, you get this brush tip which you can make some fun shapes with, and it has a different effect. Also, the Arrtx brush markers I've got don't need pumping, whereas the other two need shaking and pumping. And it's to do with the way that the acrylic ink is kept within the pen. So in these ones, I'm going to guess it's some kind of felt or cotton or something in them that's holding the ink, whereas in the other ones, the ink is loose within the barrel of the pen. So you also saw me using my Pitt pens. These are an India ink based pen. They are much more translucent than your acrylic pens. So although they are also a permanent marker, they have a very different effect. I do really enjoy the Pitt pens. They're by Faber Castell. I also have some Steadtler ones that do the same sort of job, but they have a translucency, but they're also permanent when they dry. So I decided that I wanted a focal point. Now, often you see me using collage. I decided to go with some stamping, which, gives the same sort of effect. But at this point, whatever you have is what you would use. You could stick a piece of ephemera on, you could stick some collage on, you could stick some die cuts on, whatever you like. I fancy doing some stamping. So I'm going in with one of my stamps, again with Cleverprints, which is Tranquil Tulips, because it's that sort of time of year, isn't it, where all the tulips are out. Not in my garden, but in other people's gardens. And I'm using some Versafine Clair ink from the company. I can never say Tunica. I can't say it, so I'm not going to try. But it is the colour is black, but it's called Nocturne, and it's a very juicy ink pad, which is why you see I did give it a little heat set. Although I do find that when you stamp it onto watercolour cardstock, it sinks in quite quickly. It doesn't stay wet as long. However, if you stamp it onto a very smooth cardstock, it can stay wet for quite a while. So that is something to be aware of. So I cut out my image with a little bit of a white border. That's something that I sometimes do. You'll see that may change in a little while. And I decided I was going to colour it first of all with the Ecoline pen. So I'm going in with a couple of extra colours in this part. So as well as the original colours that I used, I'm also going to be using spring green, green and fir green. I was just trying to lay down a base at this point. So you can see I've again scribbled the colour out onto my acrylic block, and then I'm just using my brush with some water to add the colour to the image. Now, I used Versafine Clair because it is a waterproof ink, so it won't move when I add the water over the top. Because I'm not using any alcohol markers, I'm not too worried about what sort of waterproof ink I use. But if you were using alcohol markers, that's something to be aware of. I think Versafine Clair would be fine, I think. But if you was using something like an alcohol-based ink pad like a StazOn, then you wouldn't be able to use that with your alcohol markers because it's, like for like, so it would move the lines. But for this effect, this is exactly the sort of ink pad that I want. So once I have gone in with one colour, I added a little bit of the pink in there as well, just to try and add some shading. But I'm making sure I dry it before I add my next layer. Now I'm adding in some of the Pitt pens to add a little bit of shading. And the colours I used in the Pitt pens were light yellow glaze, cadmium yellow, pink carmine, chromium green, and in a bit you'll see me use some black. That's across the whole of this project. Now, I wasn't 100% happy with how it looked once I'd done it, so I went back in with some more of that Ecoline marker just to sort of soften those edges a little bit. And I'm going in also around some of the other areas. So these pens layer nicely on top of the water-based pens. They give a little bit more oomph, but not totally covering. They're not totally opaque, which is what the acrylic markers are more like. So I'm now going in with the Arrtx markers. And these don't have names, they have numbers. So the ones I used in this project were 44, 18, 9 and 56. I don't tend to look at the colour numbers. Now, I realised that the water-based markers had actually bled quite a bit past the lines, and I didn't like how it looked. So I decided to go in and just trim off that excess that I'd left with the border around the image. I mostly tend to cut my images right up to the border. But sometimes when they're more illustrative designs like this one is, I sometimes find leaving a bit of a border is quite a nice look. It gives it sort of that die cut sticker kind of look, but I didn't like how it had bled past the lines, so I decided that I was chopping that off. And then I'm going back in with some more of the acrylic markers just to add extra depth into the colour. And this is where I say, yes, I do need all these pens because I want to do all these different layers. I want to get different effects from my pens. So for me, the different ways that I use them makes it a worthwhile to me. Now, I am not somebody who buys every colour in every set. I buy the colours that I think will be most useful to me. And so when I look at my set of pens and I see what other people have, perhaps I don't have as many as others. For me, it's an ideal amount. It's giving me just what I need to do what I want to do. And then I'm just going in with a white jelly roll pen as well. I love using the jelly roll pens just to add a little bit of highlight. I find they don't always work as well when I've used water-based pens, but I find that over alcohol markers, they are really good. But it worked okay for this one today. So there is my finished little flower, and I'm now going to remove the tape from my background, and I made quite a wide border for this one. I just fancied having a try and seeing what it would look like, and I really like how that border has really stands out in contrast to the background and really provides a frame for it. So I'm going to just add on a little bit of black Posca pen. Oh, and I didn't mention I did put a the black Pitt pen around the edge of the image, which is something I do when I cut up close to the border because I don't like that raw sort of whiteness. I always think it looks a bit strange, so I like to reintroduce that black line. So just a little bit of grounding for the flower, and then I have one of these sentiments from the Tim Holtz collection. This set is called Thoughts, and I chose Seen and Noted because it's a bit like now my pens hopefully will be seen and I will note them in my head to use them much more often rather than being tucked into the trolley where I couldn't. They were there, they were out, but they weren't out enough. And I am a person, I do really need to have my products right in front of me for me to remember to use them. The glue I'm using is Pinflair glue gel, and the little syringe is one I think this is a Clow glue gel syringe, but they do sell the sets for Clow and for Pinflair where you get the little syringes. It just makes it a little bit more precise, makes it a little bit easier than squeezing from the tube. And I'm just sticking that on with a little bit of dimension, and that's my final part of my project. So I'll give you a few close-up shots, and then at the end of the video you will see a list of my lovely super supporters, my YouTube members, so an extra big thank you to them. And if you have enjoyed this video, do please give it a thumbs up, and if you see that hype button, then that would be fab if you could press that too. And if you haven't already subscribed, I'd love it if you could join us. If you enjoy my content and think that you'd like to see a lot more of it, then that would be ideal too. So until the next time, thank you ever so much for watching, and I'll see you then. Bye.